I remember my economics teacher called me up and was like, "Oh, Danielle, I saw your options for university." And I was like, "Yeah." And she was like, "Yeah, people like you can't really go there. You need to be really realistic." And I just remember thinking, people like me, realistic? What? I was all happy, and then it's literally like glass shattering. And she was like, "Yeah, it's not realistic that you're applying to universities like that." Hi everyone, welcome to The Education Effect, where I sit down with different people from different spheres of society to answer this one question. Did education actually prepare you for success and where you are today? So, today is episode 1 for the new YouTube rendition, and it's going to be with myself. I'm going to be sharing my educational journey and whether I believe that school actually did prepare me or not for success. So let's get into it. Okay, so for context, I grew up in the UK. I was born and raised there, and I was living in London before I moved to a town area outside of London. So the type of school that I went to, I initially just went to a normal state school. A state school in the UK is like a public school, depending on where you are. And for secondary, I went to a private school, and that's where I was like, wow, these schools were amazing. I'm talking swimming pools, table tennis courts, squash courts, fantastic grounds, like huge, amazing facilities. And I was just like, wow. And that was an experience. I was there for a couple of years. And the immediate thing that I can say in terms of the differences between the private and the government's, like the public school, was definitely the facilities, but also just your behavior, how your conduct. I remember like being in school and we had to stand when an adult walks into the classroom, and then once they've acknowledged you, then you sit down. And there was no form of kind of talking back to a teacher. I think even the first week when I joined the school, that whole week was about how to do things in this type of school. And how to do things the school way, which was really good for embedding that culture. But of course, secondary school, and it's a whole school, which means that school had primary and nursery and then secondary. A lot of the people had cliques. A lot of the people had formed friendships and groups. So I always felt like just not quite belonging. That's not even that's a race factor, but also a class factor. Race factor because I was probably one of two black people in my year group, but that was normal for me growing up in the UK and in the area that I grew up in. But then the other layer was the class differences. So the class differences were really interesting, and it showed itself during like mufti days where you get to wear your own clothes. That's the real revealer. And I think yeah, I definitely agree with schools wearing uniform. That's what I can say. So I remember going in for Mufti Day, which is like non-uniform day, and everyone had Abercrombie and Fitch, Hollister clothes, and real Ugg boots. And I just remember thinking, whoa, okay, I want this. And then I would go and check, and it'd be like £80 for Ugg boots or £100 for Ugg boots or something. And, a top that cost like £60 at the time. And it was just like, I can't be telling my mum, begging my mum to be getting this for me. Just because I went to the private school does not mean that my family were from a really wealthy background at all. It's just that they prioritized education, and because I couldn't go to the grammar, it was like, let's go to the next best thing, which was private school. And yeah, got in there and definitely felt that difference, that I didn't really belong. And then it didn't help as well that I was in a lot of bottom sets. And that was quite shocking because I thought I was smart because I passed a test to get in. And then you realize that, okay, you're not quite smart here. So I was like in a lot of bottom sets for year 7 and 9, absolutely hated it. There was a lot of segregation, like I said, with friendships. I wanted to try and belong. And I guess that's kind of a normal experience for everyone. And then I remember being in year 9 and just being like, yeah, I really want to leave. I don't like it here at all. And I did a presentation to my family and was like, I want to move schools, and I'm going to present to you why I think this is actually a great thing for all of us. So I did this PowerPoint presentation on basically explaining to them how they are going to save so much more money, okay, by getting me out of here. My parents were sold, and they immediately said, we'll get back to you. And then they said yes. And I was absolutely ecstatic. I didn't realize that they actually just said yes because seriously, financially, it was just going to put them in such a better position. So I managed to convince them to different schools in my town, in my area, my city. I lived in a very small city, so it's kind of like a town. If you know, you know. If you grew up there, you know. And I remember basically telling them, like, let's go to these one of these schools. And they said, not this school, because this school is predominantly ethnic minority students. And you are somebody that's an influencer, but also very influenced at the time. My mom really recognized that about me. And she was like, because you are always the one that's talking, the leader, the one that's always at the front, you're going to be influenced by people around you. And if you're going to a school where it's heavily ethnic minority, heavily banter, heavily jokes, heavily enjoyment, you're going to carry that through. So I was like, no, you're not going there. And so, yeah, I went to the school near my house, and it happened to be the same school that everyone else from my primary school went to. And so it was exciting because I knew people. And I remember going in there and thinking, oh my gosh, this school is completely different to the school I just came from. Like literally opposite ends. Like imagine you've got top facilities, a swimming pool, a squash court is a normality. We went on a school bus. It was beautiful. Uniform wasn't really that much of a fan. We would all roll up our skirts, but yeah. And then I went to this school that's so old, a bit run down. I know it's a lot better now, but a bit run down, old. And the demographic of people that would attend that school were very heavily working class. You know, we had a lot of the council estates around, and that whole environment was different. So, you know, I went from prim and proper environment to the class that I went into has riots, and there was riots. And I remember the first day that I walked in, they were like, riot, and they were chucking things across everywhere. And I was just like, oh my gosh, what have I entered into? But I remember feeling not quite like I belonged, but a bit better. I remember thinking that, oh, I can do well here. And it was a weird acknowledgement. I started being in sets 2s and set 3, so that was a lot better than being in set 5s and set 6. I started developing friends that I actually wanted to be friends with. And yeah, that was a whole nother experience. Church was a big thing as well in my household. And so church was even a bit more influential. And a lot of people that went to our church were very academic, always getting the best results. And it put a bit of pressure. And it's quite funny because I remember some people at the church saying that the pressure was too much for them. But I remember for me, it wasn't actually too much for me. It was probably what I needed. I needed that challenge. And it just shows how different people thrive in different environments, right? And I remember just being so exposed. Like I really thank God for the church that I went to. We had people that just excelled and people that were literally in every level, PhD in secondary, in primary. And not just that, it wasn't just about being smart and getting A stars, but they also had a learning center connected to the church that a lot of us used to go to and basically get extra tuition and stuff. And I think that support system was excellent. And it just shows how literally a village raises a child, basically. So I saw that hands-on. A-levels was a prominent time for me. That's where I really started to discover more about my passion. That's why when you asked the question about does school prepare you for success, it's a really interesting one. When I got to A-level, I remember I stayed in the same school. So I stayed in the government school. And when I was there for sixth form, I basically ended up teaching myself. I remember teaching myself sociology. I remember just getting so fed up with I don't even know, but I just found that I could teach myself, which is really interesting because I never knew that. But I just got the textbook, and when I would read the textbook, I'd be like, this is more easier to understand than my class. This is more easier to understand than the teachers. So I just basically taught myself. I remember going to the library, literally missing class to go to the library, leaving class early to go to the library and just teach myself. So I'm really happy I got an A in sociology, so that's great. But I remember being in A-levels, and just before A-levels, there was some people in my church that had repeated, and it was mentioned that they had repeated, and the pastor was basically just sharing that, not to call them out, not to say oh, these people repeated and they didn't do well, but it was almost like, okay, they've learned from it, but what can the younger generation learn from that? What can you take from that? And I remember that really helped me. And the reason why it helped me, because it helped me to realize that what I'm about to enter into is not easy, because I thought that I can just finesse my way, and A-levels wasn't that. So when I saw that, whoa, 3 people that I know that are actually brilliant students repeated A-level, I was like, whoa, this thing must be hard. So I literally went into A-levels on it, revising all the time because I just didn't want to repeat. But I remember going into sociology and hearing about how if you're from a working class background, you're less likely to achieve well. If you're a black student, you're less likely to achieve in comparison to your white counterparts. If you're a black Caribbean boy, you're 4 times more likely to be excluded. And I remember learning about these statistics and just thinking, this is terrible. But then more than just being terrible, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is true. Like, I remember seeing these statistics in reality. All my friends, all the people around me, I was like, this is actually happening. And that's where I basically found a new passion for education. Before that, it was always performing. I was doing lots of theatre. My mum and dad would support whatever I wanted to do. So from a young age, I was a performer. So they would take me to theatre and I would do productions, and they would come, literally drive 2 hours away to watch me, perform. And I wanted to do that. But my mum was like, just get a backup plan academically. But then I found this passion. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, like, I want to do something about this, and this is wrong. And people shouldn't have their life determined because of their social class. Because you're poor, you're less likely to achieve. Because you're black, you're less likely, So I was really adamant that I want to study sociology. So when I was in A level, I remember studying economics, and I remember choosing universities, and you have to choose 5 universities and you rank them. And I remember my first pick was University of Manchester. And then I remember my economics teacher called me up and was like, oh, Danielle, I saw your options for university. And I was like, yeah. And she was like, yeah, people like you can't really go there. You need to be really realistic. And I just remember thinking, people like me, realistic? What? I remember, like, when I tell you, like, almost like dreams shattered, like I was all happy and then it's literally like glass shattering before me. And I was just like, wait, what? And she was like, yeah, it's not realistic that you're applying to universities like that. So I remember saying, okay, cool, thank you. I remember going to the toilet and calling my mom and being like, Mom, we've literally gone way too ahead of ourselves. I just spoke to my teacher and she basically said that my options, I can't get into that. I need to be realistic. I need to go to universities that more I can go to. And I remember my mom just being silent, letting me speak. And then once I spoke, she just said, do you want to go to Manchester? And I said, yeah. And she goes, then you're going to go. She said, you're going to work hard and you're going to get in there. And she was like, don't listen to anyone that says contrary. And I just remember feeling almost like, whew, okay. Like, it literally was like a life or death situation. It was like the power of the tongue. Like, she could have literally been like, all right then, yeah, maybe that is unrealistic. But the fact that she was able to just be like, if you want it, you can do it. You are going there. Don't listen to anything that's contrary. And that was the exact push I needed to succeed. And I was like, you know what? I'm going. And I worked hard and I got into University of Manchester. I was not a straight A student, guys. I was not somebody that was super academic. My GCSEs were basic to the core, but I worked hard. I'm a woman of faith. I believed in God. And I had such a good support system that despite the way that the school was, I was able to override. And, I got really good results, ABB or something like that, in my A levels. And I was able to go on to University of Manchester. And I remember being at church again, and my choir leader was like, I was like, yeah, I'm done with education. And he was like, you're just started. But what was amazing was that, he literally was right. I was only just beginning. And the fact that he was able to see that is beyond me. He's literally a choir leader. We come to sing. I don't know what you saw when I was 21. Like, I never spoke about education, but he saw it. And I remember telling my mom just smiled and she left it. And I thank God that they kind of allowed me to figure that out. And I went to go do my master's, and now I'm doing my doctorate, and I'm running an educational NGO, and it's insane, the impact that we've made over the last couple of years. We've worked in Nigeria, we worked in Ghana, doing great work within education. But I would have never seen myself in education growing up. I saw myself as a performer, and I still love performing. I still write plays. I still do performing and things like that. But I feel that definitely having the exposure, having somebody that believes in me was literally the keys to my success, and has enabled me to be someone that, builds between the borders of the UK and Africa. I've trained over 700 teachers, worked with over 45 schools. At a very young age, I was head of year. Then I oversaw and basically grew and headed the secondary school of a Britain International School in Abuja in Nigeria. All these things I accomplished at under 30, currently right now doing my doctorate. And I think young people that are taking risks, young people that are pushing beyond their borders, that needs to be normalized. That needs to be what we're seeing everywhere. So if you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to give this a thumbs up. I would love for you to comment below and share whether you had a similar experience to me or whether your experience was completely different. Do you think that school actually prepared you for success? I want to know. Let's get discussing in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe so that you're notified every single week for our new uploads. And I can't wait to see you all in my second episode where I'll be here with a guest to find out all about their educational experience. So see you all very soon. Take care. Bye.